Looks like our main.rs file is beginning to grow. As programs get larger, it is necessary to spread them across more than one file and put functionality and types in different namespaces. The Rust solution for both of these is called modules. Modules also control the visibility of items, which is whether an item can be used by the outside code, that means it's public, or is an internal implementation detail and not available for outside use, that means it's private. Let's start with putting our code in separate modules. We can create an inline module with the mod keyword, followed by the name of the module, and then followed by the actual body of the module. So for our server struct here, we would like to create a module called server. So we can say mod server, and then we just open up a new scope for this module. So now our server struct is inside of the server module. Okay, but now we see that the compiler actually complains because it can't find the type server anywhere, because now it is inside of this server module, which is like it's inside of the server namespace. So to actually use our server here, we have to prepend it with the name of the module that contains it. In this case, we have to say server, then double colon, and actually the name of the type from that module that we want to use. Okay, that looks fine, but the compiler now complains because the method new is private and the struct server is private. And it probably also complains that the run method is also private. Okay, so everything inside of a module is private by default. Doesn't matter if it's a type or some functionality. We have to explicitly state which parts of the module are in its public interface. We do that with the pub keyword. If we put the pub keyword before our struct definition, and then also before our functions, now all of this is usable from the outside of the module. We can see that the compiler no longer complains. Okay, let's also try to split our request and method in separate modules. But let's think about that. We can just create a module for request and module for method. Later on, we would also have to model our response, and there will be some new types that we will have to create for that. One thing that we can do is actually create a top-level module called HTTP, and it will contain submodules for the request and the response and the method and everything else that we would need. But everything will be nice and tidy under this HTTP module. So let's start by creating an HTTP module. So this will wrap our existing types. And now inside of this module, we can actually define other modules. So here we can define the request module, and we want it to wrap our request. And we can also define a method module that will wrap our method. Okay, so now we have one top level module called HTTP, and it has two submodules, one for the request and one for the method. Alright, but we see that the compiler complains about visibility again, because it cannot find method in the scope of the request module. So let's prepend our method with its module name again. Okay, let's see if that will work. Oh, now it complains about something else. It failed to resolve the module method, so it still cannot find it. The reason is that the method module is not inside of the scope of the request, so it doesn't know that one level up inside of its parent module, there is another module called method. In Rust, how we would refer to the parent module would be with the keyword super. So if we type super here, now we are telling it, go one level up, then find the module called method, and then in this module there will be a type called method. But we see that it complains because this enum is private, so we also have to specify that our method is public. Okay, now everything seems to be working. Another thing that we can do is, like, it would be annoying if every time we use the server, we have to specify the module that contains it first. So what we can do is actually we can use the use keyword to pull the concrete type server from the server module in our scope. Here we can say that we want to use from the server module the server struct. And now we can actually, we can delete the module definition and it will still work because it actually knows that server is actually server : server. Okay, and let's see how we might use the request in this case. Let's also make our request public because we want to use it from the outside of this module. So if we go back to the top, we might want to say something like use http : then the request module, and then the request type. Okay, that should probably work. It complains that the module request is private. It's not only data types and functionality, but also submodules themselves that have visibility. And by default, all submodules inside of a module are private. So we have to explicitly specify that this module is public, and we can do the same for our method. Okay, now this actually works, and we can use our request from outside of the HTTP and the request modules. Okay, another thing that we can do is we can get rid of this here because we don't want to type super method. So on top of our module here, we can actually use super method. And now we can delete all of that. Okay, we did successfully split our code into multiple modules, but it is still in the same file. So how do we break this program into separate files? Let's start with the server module here. We can create a new file in our source directory, and we will call it server.rs. And we can copy the contents of our server module here and paste it in our newly created file. Okay, and now we can delete this. Every file in Rust is treated as a module. Having a file called server.rs is the same as defining a mod server and then putting all of this code inside of it. So now here it should be the same, but we still see that the compiler complains because it cannot resolve what server is, because it won't just automatically go and look throughout the rest of the files and try to figure out what is this module. Again, we have to use the mod keyword followed by the name of the file, which is the name of the module that we want to put in our scope. And then that's it. We do not follow up with body of the module. So now here, the compiler will actually go find the server module in the server.rs file, and it will pull it in this scope. You can think of this as pretty much the compiler will come to this file, copy all of its content, and just paste it here, where inside of a module called server. So this is pretty much what the compiler will do. It will paste all of the necessary code from the modules that we are importing. And now when we have pulled this module into our scope, we can use different parts of it. Okay, let's do the same for our nested modules. To represent modules on multiple levels like this, we use the good old concept of folders. We create a new folder called HTTP, So in our source directory, we create an HTTP folder, and inside of this folder, we have to create two files, request and method. So we create request.rs and method.rs. Now, what's left to do is copy the contents of our modules and then paste them in the files respectively. Okay, and this goes into request. All right, and now we can actually delete all of this. Now we have the same problem. We have our HTTP module that contains its two submodules, but we have to pull it in our scope. So we use the mod HTTP statement to do that. The compiler still complains because it cannot find a file for the HTTP module. So even though the HTTP module is a folder, we still have to create a specific file for it that will explicitly specify what types and what submodules this HTTP module outputs. So it will look for two files, http.rs, or in the HTTP folder, it will look for a file called mod.rs. Let's go ahead and create this mod.rs in our HTTP folder. So here we create a file called mod.rs, and now in here we can actually specify the public interface for our module. So again, we just use the pub keyword and pull the two modules that we need. We want request, and we also want to pull the method module. Oh, the auto formatter went crazy for a second there. So now our HTTP module actually outputs the request module, and this import still works. We can also import the method from our HTTP module. Okay, that's great. But won't it be nicer if we can expose the request and method types directly out of the HTTP module and not through the submodules? Because we just want to be able to type HTTP method and HTTP request. This looks much cleaner and easier to read. To do that, we have to go back to our mod.rs file, and on the top we can just use statements. So if we use a pub use request dot request, and we do the same for our method dot method. Now, because we are pulling these two types into the scope of the HTTP module with the pub keyword, it will expose them to the outside. And here we see that these imports now work. The request and the method can be called directly from the HTTP module. We can still type method dot method because our module exposes the method submodule. But if we actually decide to delete that, we can no longer import the method through the submodule, but we can still do that. And this will work because the HTTP module exposes the method. Our main.rs file is much shorter and easier to read, and our code is better organized in multiple modules. To summarize, modules are all about organization and visibility, and this may or may not involve separate files.